Okay, I just want to give a short update, and it's kind of a reply to Millennial Smart. He wants to know why Mark Henry and RVD are sort of playing dumb with this Rajah Jackson situation. Well, if you think about it, this is Rakishi's sort of promotion. Mark Henry and RVD, they're in the business. Not necessarily in Rakishi's promotion, but Rakishi is a former superstar. So what I'm thinking is Rakishi and Mark Henry are kind of doing damage control before Rakishi opens up his stupid mouth. Because when Rakishi opens up his stupid mouth about this, it's going to be World War III. That's pretty much what's happening. Mark Henry and RVD they aren't dumb. But that's pretty much what's going on. Their colleague has a wrestling promotion that's pretty much getting a lot of heat right now. They're just, you can say, looking out for a friend with this dumbass take. That's sort of what's going on. But, people in general, they're sick and tired of, this horrible manner, this black fatigue stuff. I mean, what else is there? Just overly mad, overly just, insensitive, just stupid. That's all this was. They got to fork over a lot of money. So that's all I'm going to say right there. I'm just giving Millennial Smart a little message of what I think why RVD and Mark Henry are playing like dumb idiots. It's because they're trying to protect their friend promotion from backlash. If Mark Henry and RVD get a lot of the public on their side, then Rakishi's promotion, won't look so bad to the public. Yeah, I'm kind of forced to talk about the Rajah Jackson incident with Psycho Stu. And I'm pretty sure y'all done seen buku videos on this, but this is just my thoughts. One, before I forget, I just saw a tweet on X with Rob Van Dam saying he's on Rajah's side, and I don't know why. And, Rajah Jackson's actions is one of those, we're tired of the black fatigue stuff. Honestly, that's all it is. People want to say Rajah was acting out because of his dad's bullying and stuff people were saying online, and he's tired of people saying that he's weak and all of this stuff. Man, y'all know what happened. So just to kind of reiterate, just so maybe some of y'all don't know the full story, y'all might have only saw the clip, but Rajah was taken sort of backstage with the wrestlers. Psycho Stu, I don't care that he's a veteran and he had PTSD and, he was trying to fit back into society. That actually doesn't matter. Okay, that doesn't matter. The thing is, he's a wrestler. Okay, so Rajah and Stu sort of face off backstage. And Psycho Stu takes a prop beer can and sort of hits Rajah over the head with it. And, it wasn't a real hit. He just kind of faked it in front of the cameras and stuff. Rajah, being ignorant, like mega ignorant, feels overly disrespected. Now, Raja, why didn't you take off on him if you thought this was real? Clearly, he didn't smash the can over your head. You didn't feel nothing. So you really should have been kind of like, okay, what's going on? That's why I'm sort of kind of thinking that he was in on it a little bit, because you would have just took off on somebody if you really felt like they hit you with something. But nevertheless, Psycho Stu and Raja have a conversation later on, and Stu apologized saying, hey, I didn't know, you wasn't in on it, you not a wrestler, my apologies. And supposedly they make amends, and then they come up with something to say, hey, you can sort of get your lick back, kind of. I made you look stupid because you're not a worker, you're not a wrestler. So AJ, I guess, is the promoter or something over it. And of course, it's Rikishi's promotion, but nevertheless, they tell Raja he can get his receipt. I'm more than sure, they said, you can hit him like one time or slam him one time, you get your receipt that way. Now, Raja, you know what wrestling is. You know it's a fake sport. There is no way Raja does not know this is a fake sport. There's fake hitting. Now, you weren't in on the work before. So, we gave you a pass on that one, but wrestlers aren't really fighting each other in the ring. So, you could have speared, Stu. You could have hit Stu in the face one hard time and knocked him out, and that would have been fine. They said you can get your receipt. You're not a wrestler. That would have been fine. Maybe you could have did a real clothesline, a real spear, a real takedown. Honestly, you could have did a real shoot leg sweep and, actually, made him tap in the ring or something. That would have been fine. But we all saw the footage. Raja runs in there, slams him for real, and Stu is out cold. And then Raja continues to pummel him with knockout blows. So, long story short, Stu is really hurt. Not just a little bit, like basically all his teeth are knocked out. He's unconscious, swallowing blood. He will probably never wrestle again. Now, people want to say, well, he's not a worker, he's not a wrestler. They told him he can get his receipt. Look, dude is a grown man, and he knows for a fact wrestling is fake. You know when you're going too far. That fight would have stopped a long time ago. And, they want to say other wrestlers didn't go in there to help. Well, the guy with the face paint was kind of like, hey, get off of him. That should have been a cue right there. Okay, this is fake pro wrestling. Someone's trying to get me off of him. You just go with the flow. Nevertheless, you can't tell me he's never watched wrestling in his life. Every kid has watched fake pro wrestling before. This honestly was attempted murder. Now, should he go to jail? I'm going to leave that up to the fans. Comment down below. Should he go to jail? Me personally, I think Rampage and his son they need to fork over a lot of money. I think that'll fix the entire situation. I think the wrestling company should be held liable, and I think Rampage and his son should be held liable. Now, going to jail, going to prison, I don't know about that, but for sure, I think some mental illness type, anger management, maybe, I think maybe you can do something like that. Like, I wouldn't even say house arrest, but hey, if you don't, like a probation type of thing, like, hey, if you don't meet these requirements and fork over all of this money, then you get prison time. Because there's a lot of people at fault for this. So him going to prison won't fix the fact that this man is really injured. And he apologized. So the moment he apologized, that should have been the end of the anger. There's no need for that. He apologized. He said, hey, man, you're not a wrestler, blah, blah, blah. I'm sorry. You get your receipt. That's fine. So the next step is, hey, Rampage and, that wrestling promotion, y'all got to fork over some millions to take care of this man's family and his bills. He shouldn't have to ever work again. But that's just my thoughts on it. This is the problem. Like I said again, with our culture. But go ahead, comment down below what y'all think, and let me know, should this guy go to prison? Do y'all want to see him in prison, or do y'all want to see him fork over a large amount of cash?